Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dreamleapers. I'm your host, Harriette Cole. Happy New Year. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as you can see, we have a very special guest. I learned about him before the election because my producer, Fallon McQueen, said, there is somebody in my town who you have to interview, who you have to know because he's going places and he's from a family that has been doing all kinds of great things in Alabama for so long. And so we have been watching Shomari Figures for a minute. Let me tell you who he is. He is the newly elected representative for Alabama's 2nd Congressional District, a district that was just carved out. A true public servant and passionate advocate, Shomari brings a wealth of experience from all 3 branches of the federal government. His distinguished career includes serving as Deputy Chief of Staff and Counselor to U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, playing a key role in the Obama administration as the White House Domestic Director of Presidential Personnel, and providing critical advice to Congress on issues such as civil rights, immigration, and healthcare, very important issues. Inspired by his parents, both dedicated public servants, Shomari Figures' commitment to his community and to Alabama is unwavering, and it is a privilege to have him with us today. Please join me in welcoming Shomari Figures.
Hi, Harriette.
Hi, congratulations.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, so happy to have you. Like I told you, Fallon has been singing your praises for a while. She's always telling us what is going on in the real South, right? So we're very pleased to be able to talk to you. And, you know, I have to tell you, on election night, that was a hard one, but it was really wonderful to learn that you won your seat and that there are a few members of Congress representing the Black community across the country, 2 from your state, right?
Now 2 of us.
I mean, that's pretty amazing. Has that ever happened before?
Never. This is the first time we've had 2 African Americans representing the state of Alabama since at least Reconstruction. It was possible maybe back in Reconstruction, some post-Reconstruction, but I don't think so even then. But now myself and Congresswoman Terry Sewell have the privilege of being the first duo of African Americans to represent the state of Alabama at the same time.
Which is very exciting. And your district is a new district. Could you explain for people who don't really understand how that works, what happened and why was it important for this district to be created?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what we refer to as the Voting Rights Act district. And what that means is under the Voting Rights Act, states are prohibited from using race as a factor in drawing district lines. And so every 10 years, every state, every 10 years we do the census. And after the census, every state, all 50 of them, redraw their district lines to account for population shifts and that sort of thing. And after the 2020 census, Alabama redrew its maps. And even though the African-American population in the state makes up roughly a third of the state, a little shy of a third of the state's population, they only legitimately had the opportunity to influence 1 of 7 congressional districts, which is a little less than 15%. And so there was a lawsuit brought challenging it, saying that the district lines have been drawn with race as a motivating factor to exclude or dilute the impact of the Black vote in the state of Alabama, so as to prevent them, and by them I mean Black voters, from being able to legitimately influence the outcome of multiple congressional districts. And so that lawsuit went through the courts, and in 2023 it actually went up to the Supreme Court. And what they found was, at least preliminarily, because the case is actually still going on, but at least preliminarily, they found enough evidence to support that there was a likely violation of the Voting Rights Act by the state of Alabama in redrawing their districts. And so they ordered the state to redraw the districts, to which the state failed in that effort, and the federal court redrew the district, which is what we have now. And so they being the state, is still challenging the requirement to redraw this district, and we'll see how that plays out in court. But this was all brought about at the end of the day through a challenge that was brought under the Voting Rights Act, which, as you know, was in large part fought for, protested for, died for earned in the state of Alabama, including, most prominently Montgomery and Selma. And Montgomery is actually in this district now.
Thank you for explaining that. I think it's super important, and also important for people to know that this is not a given. I mean, there, especially what's happening with the courts and who's being assigned to federal courts. The Voting Rights Act itself is facing erosion still right now, isn't it?
Look, there are consistently challenges to it. We have seen the federal courts chip away at it. We lost the Section 5 pre-clearance requirement, which required states with a history of voting discrimination to pre-clear certain changes, including redrawn district lines through the Department of Justice. That was struck down back in 2010, I believe, 2010 or 2013. And so we are consistently seeing challenges to that. That was Section 5 that was struck down at that point by the Supreme Court. States are continuing to go after Section 2, which is the section under which this district was drawn. And so we still have to be very, very mindful of that and make sure that from a policy standpoint that we are still advocating for the protection of voting rights, for the protection of the voting power of minority communities in whatever form they may be, to make sure that governments are not purposely excluding people to maintain their political power or to dilute the political power of those minority populations.
So how do you do that? How do you make sure? What does that fight look like? And like as a member of Congress, what does it look like? And also, what can people do?
Yeah, look, I think it starts as to answer your question in the order in which you presented it. As a member of Congress, it starts with promoting laws that actually stand up for voting rights. The John Lewis or the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act would resolve a number of issues that we have currently. It would bolster protections within the voting rights space, including restoring Section 5 pre-clearance of the Voting Rights Act and making sure that people are protected in their political power. That's number one. Is standing up for laws that do just that. I believe voting should be easy. It should be easy. I tell people all the time that I think Election Day should be on a Saturday. I think initial voter registration should be automatic. Because I tell people, look, the common sort of story I tell is that when men in this country or young men in this country turn 18, they get a little card in the mail telling you to sign up for the selective service for the draft.
Still?
And you still get it. And,
wow.
And when they send that to you, they don't ask you to respond back with a copy of a government issued identification or your social security card or 2 forms of ID. It's automatic. Yeah, it's automatic. And I think voter registration, at least initially, should be just as simple. Understand if people move and relocate, obviously you have to have a process in place. But nevertheless, we have to stand up for things like that actually make voting easier, that make it more conducive for people. And what can people do? It's voting. It's actually going to the polls, showing up, making your voice heard, regardless of what the district lines are currently. But when you can influence the leadership that is representing you, whether that be in your state government, your city government, county government, or federal government, then you are doing your part. And in large part, we know that a lot of the losses that we suffer as Democrats, at least here recently, have literally just been by virtue of people not showing up to the polls. And so we have to make sure that we get out and vote and make our voices heard, to make sure that we, as President Obama used to always say, to make sure that we can be the change that we've been waiting for.
It's so curious to me that, especially knowing the history of Black people and the right to vote, anybody who knows that, let's start there, because you have to know part of our history, why they wouldn't vote, why it wouldn't be number one for every single person who has a family member who wasn't able to vote, who has a family member or community member who was knocked down, literally trying to be able to vote. And I wonder, is it that people just don't know anymore? Like, what do you think? Where does the apathy come from?
So I think it's a combination of a few things, right? Just basic historical education being one of them, but I think, the primary factor that I've seen throughout, the election that we just ran is that, there was a time, certainly, right, late 60s, throughout the 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, where you could tell people, hey, people fought and died for you to have the right to vote.
Mhm.
And, people were killed for trying to register people to vote. And that would resonate. That was enough, right? That was enough to push people to go. Because most of those people, the vast majority of those people, were alive in a world where they were told they could not vote, where they were, educated in segregated school systems, where they, grew up, in some part of their life not being able to walk on the same side of the street as some people, and people who couldn't shop in, certain stores and had to pick up food in the back. They knew that life firsthand. They knew a world where they didn't have that. And, then that next generation you get is people who would hear those stories directly from their parents, directly from their grandparents. That was me, right? My generation, right? I can remember riding in cars with my parents or my grandparents or godparents and them saying, hey, that's the theater that used to be the Black theater, or that used to be the Black grocery store. That's where we used to cut in to actually go pick up food from this restaurant. And, so you hear that from people who live that life, and that resonates. I think now what we see, because when you look at it demographically, what you see is still the most likely voter profile in America is a Black woman over the age of 55 years old.
The most likely voter profile.
Yeah, that's the most likely voter profile. And the second most likely voter profile is a Black man over the age of 55. But the inverse of that is also true. The most unlikely voter profile in America is a Black man under the age of 35. And the second most unlikely is a Black woman under the age of 35. Right. So you see this generational disconnect. And, for me, I personally think it's that, when you talk about a Black person now that's under the age of, 35, let alone under the age of 30 or 25, they are now 4, sometimes 5 generations removed, from the people in their family that actually live that life and that would actually tell them those stories. I'm 39 years old. My father was the first Black to go to the University of Alabama's law school. He was educated for a large part of his life, even post Brown v. Board, in segregated school systems, right? Because the South, well, not just the South, school systems across the country did everything they could for the next 20 years to avoid, certainly at least the next decade, to avoid integration. And so, my mother started off in segregated schools, and they lived in segregated neighborhoods. And, and
there was great benefit to that, by the way. Like, people try to act like that was a terrible thing. There were some great things about us being together as community that we have lost when the community has been dismantled.
Look, I think there was certainly some, like, when you're forced to be, more tight-knit community, it certainly breeds certain characteristics that you don't see. But there's also the flip side of that coin, where separate is inherently not equal, as they said in the Supreme Court case, right? Especially in a system where, even though you were segregated, you were not given the same resources or same access to the resources. Your schools didn't look the same. Your textbooks didn't look the same. Your job prospects were not the same. And so it's that other flip side, which I think, from my experience, I think probably outweighed the benefits of being, forced, to consistently be, in a sort of segregated state. Not even that I think that's my opinion, that they certainly outweighed it. But, I think, to your point, we've certainly seen a loss of community and a loss of sort of community history. I think as we have, progressed in terms of having broader rights, we've certainly seen a loss of a lot of things. But it's not just that, right? We've also seen, we know coming up that the Black church was at the heart of anything you wanted to do. Anything you wanted to
do,
including social change, social justice, civil rights, whatever you want to call it. The Black church was at the heart of the core of the civil rights movement. It was led by ministers for the most part. And as we've seen the influence of the Black church diminish and Black participation in churches diminish as generations go on, I think we've also lost a lot there. But there are a lot of things I think that contribute to the overall apathy. But at the end of the day, we're still in an age where theoretically it is much easier to reach many more people with less effort around any topic
That's
than
true.
there has been. Can you imagine Martin Luther King with Facebook, right?
Wow.
And so it's up to us, I think, to shift and modernize the messaging, because the messaging can no longer be, hey, you're Black, people fought for you, people died for you to have the right to
That's not
vote,
working.
therefore you should go vote, right? So
Exactly.
that's not working anymore, right? And so I think we have to meet people on the issues, right? Because at the end of the day, the reason people fought for voting rights was not just for the simple act of being able to walk in a voting booth and push a button, right? It wasn't the act of voting per se that they were after. It was the influence in the outcome of what was happening in our day-to-day lives from a policy and a decision-making standpoint. And so I think we have to meet people around those issues.
Hey guys, this is Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole, and we are talking with Representative-elect Shomari Figures. Wow, actually not elect, Representative Shomari Figures. You are in office, right? Ooh,
Yes.
awesome. That's awesome. So I want you to tell us a little bit about your family. You just mentioned your father.
Mhm.
Both of your parents have been instrumental in civil rights and standing up for what is right in a state that historically has represented a lot of challenge, let's just say, especially as it relates to race. Can you tell us about your parents and the impact that they have had on you and the person you are today?
Oh, absolutely. But before my parents, I mean, for me, it really kind of starts with my grandparents, I guess, of sorts. But I mean, I guess technically generations before that as well. I mean, I come from descendants of slaves on both sides. Mother's side family descended slaves from out of a little area called Gosport, Watley, Grove Hill, Alabama, in Clark County. My father's on the in the same county, out of Clark County, a little area called Coffeyville. And my father actually had a grandfather that was or great grandfather that was forced to fight in the Civil War as a body man for his owner's son. And so, you fast forward just 2 generations later, my father was integrating University of Alabama's law school as the first Black student to go and graduate. It was he and 6 others who started, and my father ended up graduating first out of that group. And when he finished law school, he came back home. He fought for Black property rights. He fought a number of civil rights means, including in the voting rights space, including involvement in the case that created the first Voting Rights Act district that we got in the state of Alabama. That was first represented by a gentleman named Earl Hilliard, and is now represented by Congresswoman Terry Sewell.
When was this? When this seat first came about?
This was in that slew of seats where we saw the first wave of large Voting Rights Act districts coming in 90. The election would have been in 92. They took office in 93. So this is the class of like the James Clyburns and Sanford Bishops and Earl Hilliards and who else? Benny Thompson, I think, came in a special right after that. So this was that sort of cohort. I can't remember if Lacey came in that class or not. I think William Lacey came in that that class as well. So this was 92, 93. And then, but he fought for that. But he also fought to change the localized systems of government. Another case that went up to the Supreme Court where you had cities that were had significant African-American populations, in some cases up to 50%. Where Blacks had no representative capacity in local government because they made the city council, or the city managers, as they used to call them back then, all citywide elections, no districts. So, he fought back against that, and he changed our local form of government to a mayor council form of government that we still have to today, and something that was replicated across the South and in other places across the country. But most notably, one of the cases the case my father is most known for is in 1981, the Klan lynched a young man in the state of Alabama, a teenager in Mobile named Michael Donald. And they lynched him for him doing nothing more than just being literally the wrong Black person in the wrong place at the wrong time, or being a Black person in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they lynched him for something that completely had nothing to do with him, and that they knew had nothing to do with him. But nevertheless, my father ended up suing the Klan. And in its first outcome of its kind, the Klan was for the first time held civilly liable for lynching an African American, and it bankrupted the Klan, at least financially. Certainly didn't bankrupt their mission or the objective, but it bankrupted the organization. And so that's a case that drew national and international attention. And so that's the main case that my father was known for in that space. My father died, unfortunately, in 1996. He died suddenly one evening, and my mother was on the city council at that time. She was just the second Black woman to serve on the city council here in the city of Mobile. And from there, she stepped down and ran for the seat that my father had vacated when he passed, and she won it. And she has been a consistent trailblazer in her own right, standing up to make sure that students here, particularly our public school students here, continue to have access to the type of resources that they need. She's a huge proponent of public education. Also on the healthcare front, she led the charge to make Alabama a smoke-free state, given that we had incredibly high cancer rates and secondhand smoke cancer rates here in this state. And she continues to fight those battles to this day. She was also the first, my father, at the time of his death, was the first Black president of the Senate in the state of Alabama. He was actually the first Black to lead either chamber of the state legislature here in the state. And my mother ultimately also had a stint as president of the Senate as well, and so, or Democratic leader of the Senate. And so my parents, they set the example for me, directly. I mean, it was through them that I sort of instilled this sort of yearning and desire and passion for public service. They would always ask me, like, how do you take what God has given you in whatever form, whether that is, money or skills or talents or networks, experiences, whatever it is, how do you take it and put it to use for the benefit of the people and places that are responsible for you being you in the first place? And that is, that has been my sort of guiding light, and that's how we got here.
There was probably no other thing you could do. That's pretty solid path that was laid by your family. But a lot of people, especially people in your generation, leave. You're from Alabama. Look, people have been leaving Alabama for a long time, the Great Migration being one of those moments. But throughout the United States, a lot of smart young people leave home, go to whatever the big city is, that other place that seems shinier. Yeah. And so a lot of talent dissipates from places, especially like where you're from, where things are still, the overt racism still exists, perhaps different from, like, I'm in the North and it's different. It's there, but it's different. Why did you not leave? What made you decide to anchor yourself in Alabama?
Yeah, well, I did leave, in full transparency. I did leave. And, and that was something that we were always encouraged to explore life outside of Alabama. My mother went to college outside of the state of Alabama. My father was in state. He likely would have left had he not been able to get into University of Alabama's law school, which at the time was the only law school in the state. So he likely would have left the state as well and possibly came back. But I left to take advantage of opportunities that that my education afforded me. So I had a clerkship out in St. Louis right out of law school, working for a Black female judge, Judge Nanette Baker in St. Louis. I then really wanted to work on President Obama's campaign back in 2008, but Mama was not hearing drop out of law school to go do it. And so the opportunity arose in 2012 to work on his campaign. And I did that in Ohio before then going over to DC, where I ultimately ended up in the White House, then at Department of Justice, then in the U.S. Senate, then on a presidential transition team, then back at the Department of Justice. And these are all opportunities that have prepared me for this moment. These are all opportunities that gave me insight to see how government works, how it can work, how it can be leveraged for the benefit of people who need it the most, giving me that experience to see how we can actually navigate this thing we call the federal government to try to bring good to communities that need it most. And so, I did all of that. I took that career path, never having lost sight of where I'm from, never lost sight or lost touch at all with back home, on businesses back home, obviously families back home, mamas back home, cousins, brothers. Still had, significant touches with the state of Alabama, because at the end of the day, when you grow up in Alabama, especially when you grow up Black in Alabama, you learn pretty early on in life the role that the federal government has played in making this state do right by people, especially do right by Black people. And so it was, having that sort of overarching theme behind me, you can't forget where you come from. Mm-hmm. And so, having had the experiences that I was fortunate enough to have, and then, seeing, what was emerging, like once the district lines were drawn here, mm-hmm. It was one of those things is, do you answer the calling? And I had a wife that was more of a push factor than a pull factor. And she pushed me to do just that, because she saw it. She knew the connection that I had back home. She knew the experiences that I had in government. She knew how much of an Alabama boy I was, through and through, how passionate I was and how inspired I was in coming from home. And we made that decision to relocate, to seek out the chance to actually represent the people in the communities that made me, for all intents and purposes, in Congress. And it worked out, and we're glad to be here.
So it's funny, of course, I know that you work for President Obama, and it's funny when people are in DC, it feels like it's for a moment, as opposed to leaving there, as opposed to leaving wherever you're from. Although certainly you were there. How many years were you in DC?
A little over 10.
Yeah, that's a long time. Yeah. But I know that all of us want to know what it was like to work for Barack Obama. We know that there were all kinds of challenges. As brilliant mm-hmm. as he is, Congress fought him at every turn. Mm-hmm. Being on the inside, what was your experience? What did you learn from Barack Obama?
Look, it wasn't so much just from him as it was the people that were around him, the people that were leading all of the different offices, the people that were working side by side with me every single day. Because I did not work with President Obama like every single day at all, like by no stretch of the imagination. Very few staffers do and did. But what I did work with every single day was within the environment that he created from the top down. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that's an environment of people who were there because they believed in their core that government could work for good for people. They believed in their core that government did not have to be business as usual, and leaving certain communities behind and treating certain issues consistently year after year and decade after decade, to the disadvantage of a lot of core people and groups, and trying to level the playing field. And, that passion was something that inundated the White House, the halls of the White House. There was a sort of glimmer that you saw in everybody's eyes that worked there, no matter if they had been there for a week or had been there, since day one when he got there. And that was very inspiring and very motivating, because it's, still every now and then I'll randomly go and look at, speeches from 2008. One of my favorite videos on YouTube is this sort of montage of reaction videos of communities across the world when they called that election back in 2008. And that same sort of spirit was there throughout that tenure. Mm-hmm. But I one thing I'd really say that I learned the most from watching him move is the spirit of you still doing you despite the noise, despite what's going on around you, despite the rhetoric, despite the darts that are being thrown your way, despite the offensive comments, despite the efforts of people to bring you down, despite the fact that people may oppose anything just because it has your name on it. There were several instances in that administration where he thought that there were some good ideas that emanated from the Republican side of the aisle, and he advanced the ball on them, only for them to then oppose them. And so, like, even to this day, we sit here in the state of Alabama. We're one of just a handful of states that has still refused to expand Medicaid. And I, for one, believe that the primary reason that we have done it or refused to do it here is because it was attached to Obamacare. Mm-hmm.
which so many people are benefiting from to this day.
Absolutely. And it was, if Donald Trump said, let's expand Medicare, I'm sure they'd be lining up, chomping at the bit, right, to do it and saying how great of an idea it is.
Let's see if he does that.
We'll see. But I mean, it's that spirit of being able to work through that when people are still doing things and they're going to do things to try to bring you down, but you still rise above it and you still push through it. And I think I also learned from him the importance of having people around you who have an innate ability to just figure out a way to get things done, no matter what they are. Just they need one instruction, and that's go, right? And they figure out a way to make it happen. And so I've strived to be that type of person in my own career, and certainly look to have those sorts of people around me as we take this next step into Congress.
Excellent. Hey guys, this is Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole, and we are talking with Congressman Shomari Figures of Alabama, the 2nd District of Alabama, and we are so proud of you in this new role. I want to talk about the impact potentially in the future now and moving forward of the Congressional Black Caucus. In the past, when it was formed, it became a very powerful block of members of Congress whose voice had to be heard because it was this gathering of influence. And over the years, sometimes it's more influential than others. I'm curious as to your thoughts about the Congressional Black Caucus and in moving forward, how do you think it can best work in impacting change for Black people?
Look, I think it is a remarkable organization that is that keeps the conscience of Congress stabilized, right? They are the ones, in my opinion, that have consistently been there to make sure that the actions of Congress, no matter what the issue, do not do so to the disadvantage of communities that don't normally have a seat at the table, right? Because all of them there, every single member of the Congressional Black Caucus, to which I believe I am now member number 62, every single member was once part of a class of people that were not allowed to be members of Congress. And so I think that sort of historical galvanizing factor unifies them, not just around what it means to be Black, but what it means to be poor, what it means to come from rural communities, what it means to come from urban communities that have suffered from neglect, what it means to come from environments where you are not a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th generation legacy of higher education or business ownership, what it means to still be a 1st generation college graduate. It is that those unique factors about the caucus, I think, that make it so unique. And so now you see that, the caucus itself has grown to where, look, there are 210 Democrats, I think, in this, 210 in this caucus right now as we sit. Republicans have 215, 210. I mean, a couple of seats are up in the air right now because of the, a couple of resignations and people going into the administration. But nevertheless, we have 210 Democrats, of which 62 are CBC members. Right?
That's significant.
Yeah, it's significant, right? And so when you look at that, I'd go so far as to say that the influence is still very much so there, especially when you look at the fact that one of the members of CBC is now the leader of the party in Leader Jeffries. And so I think we've had great leadership here recently. I mean, my most direct experience with CBC came under the leadership of the outgoing chair, Steve Horsford, and now we have Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, who's the new incoming chair. But I worked more closely with Horsford throughout the election process, and them working with us and strategizing with us and driving resources our way to make sure that we could win this seat, and them prioritizing winning this seat. Because of this is Alabama, and this is a case where CBC got involved in the litigation, still involved in the litigation. And so it was a priority of them. And so I owe them for that. But nevertheless, I align with the values of CBC. I align with the belief that this can be and is one of the more persuasive and influential caucuses that we have within the body. And I think, how we leverage that going forward is you leverage it by numbers, because we all care to make our communities better. The other thing I'll say that's like most notable, I believe, you can fact check me on this, but I believe that of those 62, the majority of those members now represent districts that are not majority Black.
Wow.
Including my classmate, Janelle Bynum, who get this, her district is less than 1% Black.
Where is she?
She's in Oregon.
Wow.
Oregon. And her district is less than 1% Black. And so
that's significant.
Yeah, it's significant. It's very significant. But she's not the only one. You look at Gabe Amo out of Rhode Island. We have Steve Horsford out of Las Vegas. Like there are a number, and I believe that number is in excess of half now, of CBC members no longer represent districts that are majority Black. My district is not a majority Black district. It's 48-46. It's 48% Black, 46% white. So still not at that 50% majority threshold. But nevertheless, I think that's noteworthy.
It is. I don't think people are aware of that.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's not that these are not members of Congress who've been elected because of the color of their skin.
Right.
These are members of Congress who have been elected because communities that look like America, in many respects, felt that they were the best candidate for the job. They were the best person to do it and get it done. And so I look forward to being a part of that. I look forward to working with them on a variety of issues, because as we know, still in America, like the African-American community is still disproportionately impacted by so many issues in terms of how the impacts ultimately trickle down to that sort of personal subjective level. And so I look very much so forward to working with Congresswoman Clark and Congressman Steve Horsford, the chair emeritus, to continue to drive progress and make sure that we're highlighting the needs of CBC districts across the country.
I think it's so important, and thank you for giving a clear view. Today when diversity, equity, and inclusion feel like they have been flushed down the toilet, so many companies that acted as if they were conscious of behavior that was not inclusive after George Floyd was murdered, then millions of dollars was flooded into many businesses to rectify things. And that is gone. That is over. I mean, we've even seen it was a report in the Times the other day about because of taking away the restrictions or not restrictions, but what I'm talking about is Harvard. Harvard has a much lower enrollment this year than ever of Black students because they took away the fairness quotient. I can't remember what it's called. With this wave away from welcoming diversity, I just wonder, what is that going to look like for you? What is that going to look like fighting for people's rights, fighting for inclusion, fighting for opportunity when it is eroding right before our eyes?
Yeah, look, I think it takes intentionality and focus and never forgetting where you come from, right? Like I come from a place where I know I'm not sitting here having this conversation with you today if it wasn't for levels of intentionality and diversifying University of Alabama's law school.
Right.
If it wasn't for efforts of intentionality in reforming the local form of government that we have in the city of Mobile, because my mother would never have been elected to the city council if we did not have that. You can't forget where you come from. In fact, that's one of my early observations about Congress is that we have a lot of people here who were born on second and third base thinking they hit a double or a triple themselves. And they've lost sight of the fact that for them, and for us, right? I stand here before you as someone who was not born with the bat in my hand at home plate, right? Because of battles and that were fought, well before me by my parents, by my grandparents. but I think too many of us forget where we came from. I think too many people in Congress forget that, yeah, you didn't have to rely on government for X, Y, and Z, but your grandparent did.
Yes.
You didn't have to rely on loose immigration standards to be able to enter this country, but your great grandparents did. And if those standards weren't there, you likely wouldn't be here. And so, you mentioned like how do we leverage the CBC? The CBC, I guarantee you, will not forget where we come from. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus will not forget it, because we know, that absent someone being there to continue to remind Congress of its conscience, to be the conscience of Congress, that we will slide back. And in sliding back, we know who ends up on the low side of every bad statistic in the country, whether it's, we look at, here in the state of Alabama, we have the, statistically tied for all intents and purposes for the lowest life expectancy in the United States of America. Who do you think lives shorter lives? Black people or white people? Right? It's not by much in Alabama, but Black people live shorter lives. We have the sixth lowest literacy rate in America here in the state of Alabama, students here in the state of Alabama. Who do you think is reading at the lowest levels? Black students or white students? Right? We have the fourth lowest wages in the United States of America. Who do you think is making lower wages? Black workers or white workers? And so we have to be cognizant of that there's a reason that has been the case historically. And we have to do everything that we can within the realm of obviously the law to make sure that we don't forget that, and that we advance policies that work to balance the playing field, that work to give people the same access to opportunities that for decades, for centuries, certain communities have been restricted from being able to take advantage of. And so for me, that's what it looks like.
As you are beginning this term, what's most important to you? What are you hoping that will be your first issues that you're going to work on?
Yeah, I mean, most importantly, it's giving voice to many communities that are now represented here in District 2 that have for too long felt like they have not had an opportunity to have federal representation that really cared about the needs of their local communities. A big thing we're dealing with right now in this community, as mundane as it may sound, is hospitals literally closing in this district. I have 13 counties in this district. 2 of them of our big counties, Mobile and Montgomery. They got a lot of hospitals, a lot of healthcare access. But the remaining 11 counties, 2 of them have not had hospitals in decades. That leaves 9. Across those other 9, we lost 4 hospitals just during the election.
Now.
Oh yeah, just during the past election, we lost 4 across those 9 counties, and then
why?
They don't. It's a combination of a number of factors, but the driving factor, at least in the immediate, presence right now, is the state's refusal to expand Medicaid. That's part of it. The Medicare reimbursement rates are part of it. The way that is calculated and the time delays on it make it tough. Loss of healthcare practitioners in a lot of these counties is, that's part of it. Lack of a local tax base is part of it. Lack of job opportunities that offer private insurance is part of it. And loss of population across, the rural parts of this state is also driving a lot of it. You mentioned earlier that, people leave. Unfortunately, I came back, my mother came back, but not everybody comes back. Most don't come back. And in fact, we found in this process, most are encouraged not to come back, to the communities that they come from. And so, it's not a single factor, but it is a single reality. And that's that these hospitals are closing down. And that's more than just a healthcare issue. It's an economic issue, because how do you recruit a business when that pitch begins with, hey, by the way, we don't have a hospital, but we want you to live here. We want you to send your kids to school here. We want you to open up a business here. We want you to retire here, right? You can't. And so that's something that we have to tackle at the outset. We have to. And so I'm committed to doing that very early on. Beyond that, we have a number of huge infrastructure investments and challenges that we have across this district that we need to see across the finish line, and or try to get resources here to address, to increase the economic viability and vitality of many of the communities in this district. And then the other thing I'd say is gun violence is something that is a significant issue. significant issue, someone that has touched, me, multiple times directly through family members or close friends or neighbors and such. And so it's an issue that I do not feel that we cannot get a handle on through sensible legislation that incorporates solutions from across a variety of sectors, including the business community, the education community, the law enforcement community, the church community. We have to get a handle on it, because every time one person shoots a person, assuming they're only shooting one person, which is increasingly becoming less common these days, but you're losing, at a minimum, you're losing two people directly: the person that shot and killed, the person that does the shooting, and that's not to mention the impact that has on the families that each one of them likely have. And so we got to get a handle on it.
That's so true. Hey guys, this is Dreamleapers with Harriette Cole. We're talking with Congressman Shomari Figures from Alabama. We just have a couple of minutes left, but when you speak about gun violence and the fact that it's personal, I think I think a lot of these issues, if people are touched by them, then they look at them a little bit differently. No. When it seems like something that's over there, then you don't have to think about it. It's somebody else's problem. And personalizing stories, I think, certainly can help. I want to know what is your spiritual, psychic armor that you're bringing into this role, because people are going to be so-called gunning for you. Yeah. And how do you keep strong? How do you keep the faith as you move forward?
Look, I grew up the grandson of a Black Baptist preacher in Alabama, and
that's it.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we start, right? With that sort of underlying belief that no weapon formed against you shall prosper. But I also believe in doing the work, right? You can have as much faith as you want, but as we know, faith without work is dead. And so you have to get out and do the work and let the work speak for you, and show people that you're here to advocate on behalf of good. You're here to advocate on behalf of progress. You're here to advocate on behalf of people that don't have, a seat historically at the table. And if you do that, I think people will see that you're not here for, political, ideological reasons. You're not here to just take marching orders from a party or a caucus or whatever. You're here to do the right thing, and people respect that. People respect, you going to bat for them. And, even since we've been in this race, since we won the race, I run into people, just out in the communities, and they say, hey, I didn't vote for you, but you're my congressman. And so I'm praying for you. I'm wishing you the best and looking forward to working with you. My response is, that's okay. You didn't vote for me. That's okay. Because now, now I get to do the job to try to earn your vote. I believe that these races, congressional races, are local. I had a guy tell me when I got into the race, he said, hey, if you get out here and you find out that the number one issue in this race is potholes in the streets, then this race is about potholes in the streets. It's not about telling the mayor or go call your mayor, right? You have to run these things on local issues. And I think for too long, that's what we have gotten away from on both sides of the aisle. We've nationalized congressional races around issues that really aren't impacting communities day to day. And with that, you lose touch with the people that you're claiming to represent. And so that's what I am committed to not doing, and making sure that we go to work every day with that first and foremost. And I think that's also going to help that armor. And lastly, look, I'll say my wife certainly keeps me grounded in a way, and keeps me cognizant of what's out there in terms of negativity and pitfalls, and how to navigate it and handle it in a way, where you don't forget you don't forget who you are, right? You don't forget that at the end of the day that you're doing this for those 3 kids that call you their father. And so, that too helps. Having a praying mama helps.
Yes.
For sure. And so we are, so we feel well equipped to handle it. But at the end of the day, we're going to get up there, do the work, stay grounded, remain a believer, and we're gonna get the job done.
Well, congratulations. We look forward to watching you do your thing in Congress. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you, Harriette, so much.
And thank all of you for tuning in. I told you this was going to be a great year. We're going to be watching Congressman Figures as he moves through Congress. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.
And hello, sweet home Alabama.